Your reharm videos obviously is what got a lot of people and got me to seeing what you were doing. So what I'm working, like basically now I'm just trying to practice technique like an hour a day or something when I have time because, super busy life, unfortunately. But kind of seeing a little bit about your reharm process because I've done reharms for songs, but never for like somebody talking or a conversation and how you kind of do that.
Okay, cool. Well, let's start on the the harmonizing thing. So the videos, obviously they're two main parts. The first part is transcription because we obviously have to figure out what's actually going on note wise. And that's true whether it's music or speech. So it's really the same thing. So I tell people, I say, if your vocal cords are vibrating, there's a pitch there, right?
Sure.
So it's just about breaking it down to a small enough piece that you can identify what that pitch is. A lot of people think I have perfect pitch. I don't. It's just like I just listen really closely.
Okay.
And that's really it. When I first started, I would slow things down to try to, I just go into Premiere and I would like stretch it out, but maintain the pitch, and just so I could kind of hear. I could have more time to kind of hear what was going on in a particular sentence or whatever. I don't need to do that anymore. I guess maybe I've gotten better at it. I guess
faster.
Or faster. Yeah. But I guess that's what happens when you do it a lot. But mimicry has been a huge tool. And what I mean by that is I think that there's a component to memory, which includes pitch. And so, for example, if somebody says, well, I don't know. If I were to mimic that, I'm not going to go, well, I don't know. I'm going to say, well, I don't know, right? Because my memory hears not only the words that were said, the timing that it was said at, and maybe the volume, the inflection, the phrasing, but it also hears the pitch. And so, for example, if you have a favorite movie that you can recite a bunch of lines from, a cool thing to do would be to analyze about yourself. Am I reciting these lines at the actual pitch they were delivered? Right? There's a really great YouTuber who goes by ProZD. He makes these short videos. They're like skits of him talking to himself. And they're usually something humorous about video games or something like that. But he just put out a video a week ago. The title of it was, I Can Recite Any Scene from Disney's Peter Pan from Memory. And the video itself was, it was impressive enough just to watch it. Somebody was holding a phone and he was on the other side of it, so he couldn't see it. And he was basically saying, okay, and then he's going to go around and he's going to smack here.
Take that! And then there's a little slashing around. One of the womp. Dun, 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 dun.
And then it would happen. And then he's like, and then he says, blah, 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 blah.
And then he's going to go, cross this hook! Come on, everybody! They're all running.
And then the line happens. So like he's basically telling you what's about to happen, and he nails every single thing perfectly. But one thing that he does that I don't think anyone picked up on, he was matching the pitch of every line he delivered. It matched perfectly with the original scene. And so I'm convinced that there, some people, and I don't know how many people this is. I don't know if it's common amongst musical people, or if it's something that people just don't even really think about that much. But I'm convinced that is a component of memory that is, in a lot of ways, hugely important if you're talking about an accurate representation of something that you've heard before. So to bring it back to sort of my videos, they are pretty much exactly that, where I'm mimicking a line that was just said or that's being said at the moment. It's just, instead of doing it with my voice, I'm doing it on the piano. And I'm just finding the corresponding pitches to whatever's being said vocally. The way I look at it, there's no difference between that and somebody singing. It's just that when somebody's singing, it's a little easier because it's intentional. But there really isn't any difference. It's all vocal cord vibrations that create sound waves that we can hear.
Sure.
So that's the transcription process of the videos, and then I think the part that you mentioned that you're probably even more interested in is what then goes into the harmonization of whatever that line was.
Before you get too deep into like the chords and the harmony, when you're listening to pitches from the voice, I guess my biggest struggle is I haven't tried it too much. Is just because when people are talking, you're not talking a perfect E or a perfect A sharp or a perfect B flat or whatever. You're kind of in between pitches. So when you're playing that, what do you, especially with the piano, you can't pitch bend unless you have a pitch bend wheel. On the guitar, I could do that little bending up to the note. But how do you navigate that?
Here's the short answer: I don't.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right, and you would be surprised at how rarely that actually happens, and this is a whole sort of scientific question that I don't know how to answer, but I wonder if there is a connection between the temporal system that we use musically, and the way that we speak. You would think there wouldn't be, because when I'm talking to you, my brain is not thinking anything about what pitch I'm talking at, but for the entire spectrum of tuning, it's amazing to me how often speech falls perfectly in line. And it's pretty rare that I have to deal with something that's really off, which is, that's something I still haven't figured out why that happens, but it's interesting nonetheless. But when I do encounter that scenario, basically your ear does not care. Your ear wants to hear a starting point and a movement to an ending point. Mm-hmm. So, are you familiar with Jacob Collier?
Of course, yeah.
So he's talked about this. I think when June Lee put out a few videos of Jacob talking at length about a lot of his sort of
negative harmony and all that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the things he talked about, if you remember, was his explanation of microtonal usage. And what he was saying was that if he has to get from here to here, which is only 1, 2, 3, 4 chances to get there, but he needs 5 beats, he'll literally just move at equal, intervals 5 times until he lands where he needs to. And what he's saying is that your ear doesn't actually care what the notes in there are, just that we're starting at a place and arriving at a place. Right. So if the movement is driving you somewhere and it makes sense where you start and where you end, the in between doesn't matter. Right. So he can use those microtonal intervals and create notes where there are none, because your ear's not going to hear it. Your ear's going to fill in the blanks for you. Right. So I do kind of the same thing when it comes to encountering microtonal speech. I basically don't care, because I'm going to choose. So if I have somewhere in between E and F, I'm going to say all right, well, say I'm going from the approaches, right? I'm doing just kind of like a, if I'm coming from here and the next note is somewhere in between E and F, I'm just going to pick E, because the context, your ear will hear the E. Mm-hmm. It'll do the work for you. So even though it's not perfect, our brains kind of fix. It's like fixing it in post. You know what I mean? It's close enough that the context of the chords surrounding the note will help you hear it in tune.
So you're almost letting the chord dictate which the next note is.
I let the context, yeah.
Because you maybe if you were going a different direction, you might have chosen F. Correct,
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so I make that decision based on where I am and where I'm going. And so and it's actually in some ways, if I encounter a microtonal note, that makes my life easier, because if it was definitively F and I'm coming from here, I have to figure out, okay, am I going to go? What am I going to do? I got to come up with some new harmonic device to move me from point A to point B. But if it's in between and I get to choose, makes my life easier, because no matter where, so this is a good note for improvisation too. Mm-hmm. No matter what you're doing, what you're playing, where you are, the wrong note is only ever a half step away from the right one.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So for me, if I have a microtonal note, one of them is going to be perfect. One of them is going to be completely useful for me in the harmonic context. So it's if I get to choose, it's just easier on me. So, and again, your brain and your ear will do the work of making that note slide into how it should sound. And we will accept a certain amount of detuning as still being correct because of the context. So yeah, context is really everything.
It also seems that if you have that notes a little bit wrong, the piano, since it's, you know, perfectly in tune, it's going to lock in to whatever your brain wants it to hear.
Well, right, because you know, with this instrument, I've been establishing, you know, if I'm like all of those leading chords into that ending part is giving context to your brain more and more and more and more, so that even when you're faced with that note that's not perfect, everything leading up to it has insinuated that it's going to be this. So if it's like ever so slightly sharp, doesn't matter. It'll fall right in. So yeah, so it's a combination of using the context of the harmony as well as the fact that your brain and your ear will do a lot of the fixing for me. Cool.
And then I guess in chord choices, do you have like favorite chords you like to use? Like I love sus chords, or I like sharp 11 chords, and you're just kind of, you know, how does that go about?
Well, they're all fair game. And it's going to kind of depend on, you know, what the melody is doing. So as I start to work on things, I develop like a vibe for this particular one. So for example, you know, if I'm doing something that's got a bunch of sus chords like everywhere, and it's got kind of a diatonic feel to it, depending on the context, I may not want to whip out like a super heavily altered, you know, dominant chord or something like that, because it might just be a little bit out of place for the overall vibe of what I'm working on. So I let kind of the melody dictate that, in the sense that a theme will start to develop. And so I'll generally stick with that theme, whether it's kind of more of like a smoother diatonic, you know, more pop oriented thing, or whether I dig super into like the crunch or the dissonance of like a lot of maybe more jazz influenced voicings and things like that. And, you know, I mean, things like, for example, like the video that kind of started everything, that first the Cardi B Uggs video. I mean, literally that whole thing, I don't remember. I literally played it one time.
That's okay. I don't remember stuff I read a while ago either.
I want to say it was a bunch of half diminished chords.
Okay. Or
like some form of diminished something that was that first line. You wouldn't really expect that something so dissonant would be the answer there. And I don't recall why I made that decision. But I mean, I could go back to that same video and work with or whatever it was, and I could completely do it again and change the harmony entirely. That's just because, you know, all it is a line of notes. You can apply it to almost anything.
Absolutely.
You know?
Are you like, you know, you have your F note. Are you kind of being like, okay, could it be this chord? No, I don't like that. Could it be this chord? Can it be this chord? Are you kind of just messing around with stuff?
Well, yeah. And like I said, you start to kind of develop a theme as you go. But I put out a video quite a while ago now. I called it something like how to make any note fit in a chord in any key. And basically what I did is I just sat there and I said, all right, let's take a C. Cool. Well, how about this? And showed how one note can fit in some variation of a chord, no matter what key that chord is in, right? Sure. So like, and that goes for literally every single note. So at any point in time, it doesn't matter what anybody's speech is, or whether you're transcribing a line of music. It does not matter at all what the notes are, because it'll work with anything.
Sure.
Right? Because even if I'm talking like, all right, so in E, I'd have to use it as like a, you know, maybe like it's a flat 13. So am I going to do like a flat 9, flat 13 voicing? Like what, you know, how am I going to incorporate that C? But I'll find a way, because it'll work. Right.
So you're kind of in, like, 'cause my perspective, I guess, going into this was, okay, how am I going to make what I'm playing fit the music? And you're kind of doing like, no, I'm going to make that fit what I want.
Bingo.
Which opens up everything because
Yes.
you can make any note match any chord, no problem. And I used to do exercises like that. It's a lot of fun, but that itself makes this a lot easier, hopefully, when I try it.
Well, it opens up the door to infinite possibilities, because you're saying that I do not care what the answer is. For example, like if I go to transcribe the notes of somebody's speech, whatever the product of that is, I don't care, because I can do anything with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, anything applies to anything else. So it's like, you're totally free. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I do not start from the standpoint of like, I'm going to make something musically like chord based. You know, I start from the other side, which is I wind up with this melody, and then I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll just, figure out how to turn this into something. And I'll start usually like if I have a line, I'm like, all right, what does that sound like? And I start to think, okay, what key do I feel like maybe I'm in? Am I in that key? Is that the tonal center? Is the... maybe not. You know what I mean? Like, you're just playing around with all these different palettes until you find one that you feel like is the closest fit. It could be anything. It could be a number of different, and it could move too. Like you could start or I could go or I could go let's see.
Yeah.
Make it dissonant. But I mean, just right there, we took one line and we just spit out three different things that some might sound better than others, but basically the point is like you can make them all work. You know what I mean? It's this process is way more flexible than it looks.
Yes.
From the outside, because at the end of the day, it's just like, hey, I'm just gonna throw some chords around until I find something I like.
And then as you go on, you start getting used to, I might like this chord here. And then when you're doing something, you're like, let me try that. Bam, it works,
I'm sure that, in sort of practicing different ways of reharmonizing, you've done things like play a tune and latch onto a harmonic rule where you're going to move the bass line in half steps or something like that, or whole steps, whatever. You know what I mean?
Every melody note is going to be a major seventh or a sharp four or whatever. I've done that as well.
Exactly. So those are all really like that stuff is valuable in the sense of it's just opening your ear to force the issue of how do I make a chord fit with a melody note? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Or how do I make a melody note fit into a chord rather? So that's basically what I'm doing. It's basically just like, because the melody is the melody. You can't do anything about that. Right. Yeah. So when I listen to somebody's speech, whatever's coming out of their mouths, that's what it is. I'm not changing it. I'm not auto-tuning it. I'm not pitch shifting it. It is what it is. And I have to work with it. So, that then says, well, there's your answer. That's cut and dry. So now what are you going to do with it? Right. And that's where it comes into like, well, I can basically do anything I want with it. But in that process, I'm trying to do something that's harmonically sensible. Right. Sure. So if, I'm trying to use devices that are, like people kept asking me to do the oh shit a rap meme.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's just like an Instagram video from a while back, but I put it out a couple days ago. Excuse me. And
with that rat, like that superimposed rat in the front.
Exactly. Yes, that one.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first few notes of when he comes in, he starts yelling. He goes, "Oh shit, a rat!" Right. So I figured out it was that, and then I'm like, "All right, well, that's pretty flexible. That's just this. So I mean, I can do like I can do all sorts of different things. I wound up going with, you know, just because I played it once, I was like, yeah, I like what that sounds like, and I just stuck with it. But I could have done, you know, any number of things. You know, the options are endless. You could go, let's see, you could go dissonant with it and do something like, let's see. You know, but like, sure. There's a never-ending arsenal of ways that you can apply that.
Sure. What I've noticed from what I've seen you do is that you tend to lean more towards harmonically pleasing with your chords.
I do. Yeah.
Which is nice. You know, you hear that old, like, you know, Mr. Rogers vibe or something, you know, when you play it. So, which is good.